Amnesty
International has been around for over 50 years now. But who belongs to this organisation? How's it funded? And more importantly, are we listening? Joining us on iTalk today is Philippe Hensman, Director of Amnesty International Belgium.
Aujourd'hui, Philippe Hensman, Directeur d'Amnesty International Belgique.
Philippe Hensman, hello, and thank you for joining us. Earlier we filmed a few people in the streets of Brussels who wanted to ask you some questions. Here's the first.
Hello, my name is Aude. I live in Brussels. I wanted to know, how do you manage to have human rights coexist with cultural and ethnic specifics?
This is a general question. For example, the veil or gay rights in some countries are religious or cultural issues. How do you put things into perspective? How do you decide on a position?
First, we base our decision on international law, which allows us to make a decision on certain issues.
What kind? The Universal Declaration?
The Universal Declaration is not a law, it's a statement, while international covenants, for example, are much more accurate and more obligatory. So this is the first thing. The second thing is that we consider first the rights that don't contradict cultural traditions or other rights. For example, female circumcision is not a right.
You have some very sensitive tasks, like Palestinian Haha Shalabi, for example. Israelis say that she belongs to the Islamic Jihad. She went on hunger strike for about 40 days before being transferred to the Palestinian territory. How would you take a position with a sensitive area like that one?
Well, we always try to take account of new international law or humanitarian law when necessary, because if it is a conflict, then we will have to look at international law. We also try to consider the rights of the weakest and the poorest.
It's difficult, isn't it?
It's always difficult. Our responsibility is to try with all the powers we have had for years, plus the support of the international law, to catch the government, because they are ultimately responsible for the fate of the people they lead.
Second question for Mr. Hensman.
Hello, my name is Ange. I live in Brussels. I really wanted to know where the money collected on the streets for Amnesty goes.
I looked on your website, I typed the keyword budget, but it's hard to find your budget. How much money do you have? Because you only depend on your members' money, you don't have the financial support of governments.
No, for French-speaking Belgium, because it's the thing I know better, our budget is 4 million euros. 1 million used to finance the international movement. That means the support in our sections in the south, research, campaigning and lobbying internationally. And then the rest is used to finance campaigns here in Belgium. We're not a humanitarian organisation, not even a development organisation. That means we do not transfer money to the poorest on the ground. We're not here to build hospitals. We're not even here to help populations in natural disasters.
What's the share of wages? What's the share of advertising campaigns?
Again, if I take the section of French-speaking Belgium, 1.2 million of the 4 million budget is used to pay wages. Only 32,000 euros is spent for advertising campaigns.
And how many paid people work for the organisation?
Around, I think it's 1,000 members of staff.
Okay, third question for Amnesty International on iTalk.
Hi, my name is Francis Daza. I'm a Spanish exchange student in Brussels, and here is my first question. How much influence has Amnesty International had on society today?
It's what I said at the beginning of the programme. Who's listening to you?
A study's been made by an American university to know the most influential think tank in the world, and Amnesty has been shown as an example, at least on issues of human rights and international policy.
That's normal, because it's kind of cool to take you as a reference, isn't it? Have you any examples of changes you've made in governments?
If you take the example of the death penalty, when we started to fight against it, 16 governments abolished it. Today the trend is completely reversed. There are only 20 countries in the world that still practice the death penalty. Years ago, the Torture Convention did not exist. The International Criminal Court did not exist.
How can you pressure governments? You meet the members of governments around the world. Do they welcome you, for example, in countries like Syria?
No, Syria does not let us enter. We will interview human rights organisations and refugee organisations. In the last 2 months, in Belgium alone, we made a dozen visits to embassies. This morning, we were well received by the embassy of Burundi to discuss events taking place right now. So we meet many governments and many ambassadors, and then we pressure our own governments to do the same.
What are your means of pressure?
Lobbying, we use the media, organise actions. This morning, Burundi's ambassador told me they received thousands of letters from our members who told them to change their perspectives.
Okay, another question for Amnesty International.
I'll
translate this question from Wan Shaksa. Do the Turkish respect the rights of Kurdish citizens? If so, why do these massacres of Kurds continue today?
No, there are actually huge human rights violations against the Kurds in Turkey. And we have denounced these acts on several occasions, including the recent events where we saw people who were bombed and attacked by Turkey.
Any answers?
Sometimes what matters is that other countries put pressure on Turkey by listening to human rights organizations.
We've a written question from Günther, who's German. I quote, what will happen to the right of residence in Europe, especially in times of crisis when there aren't enough jobs for everyone? Does Amnesty International have something to say about that?
Yes, we have our say. We have an unfortunate tendency in Europe to close ourselves in and not allow people with similar brains in the workplace. But we can't reject or outsource the processing of asylum claims to other countries. Sub-Saharan Africa accounted for 30% of the Libyan population, people herded into concentration camps funded by the European Union. This is unfortunate because the mass population flows are not so huge. Take Belgium again. The flow of people seeking asylum in our country has decreased in the last 10 to 15 years. We're not facing a massive influx, but despite that we have a responsibility to manage the issue, because international law is there and reminds us that there was a time when we needed asylum.
Last question, Mr. Hensman. You said yourself that decisions are often very sensitive. Is Amnesty International sometimes wrong?
I've been with Amnesty International for 30 years and we've only been wrong a few times.
For example?
We were once under the impression Iraqi soldiers entered a hospital and opened fire on babies. We conducted 3 field operations, 3 missions to reveal the truth. We had it wrong and had to acknowledge the mistake.
And what do you do to recognise it?
We issued a statement saying that we made a mistake.
Thanks very much, Philippe Hensman, and thank you for asking your questions here on iTalk. You can find all the details on our website. Thank you very much, and see you again next time.
Tous les détails sur notre site internet. Merci beaucoup.